Welcome to AINdebrief, where we take a look back at the most important aviation stories of the past week by the AIN editors who covered them. I'm AIN Alerts editor Chad Troutvetter. In this week's episode, Air Transport editor Gregory Polek explains what the FAA's decision to unground the Boeing 737 MAX means, when airlines will start flying the type again, and when Boeing will resume deliveries of the narrowbody. And senior editor Kerry Lynch discusses why Gulfstream Aerospace executives are optimistic about business aviation sales in the fourth quarter and 2021, as well as Hermeus Corporation's new funding for a hypersonic business jet. So earlier this week, the FAA ungrounded the 737 MAX from Boeing. So what was the order, the airworthiness directive that the FAA issued?
Yeah, Chad, the AD essentially specifies certain design changes to the software, the flight control software, and also some new training requirements for the pilots, including simulator training, which will take a good amount of time to get everybody ready to actually fly the airplane. So the first airline in the U.S. that appears likely to fly the MAX is American, and they've said that they will start flying between Miami and LaGuardia in New York on December 29th. So they're going to beat that end of year target. Southwest Airlines yesterday, they seem to be the laggard amongst the U.S. airlines that are going to re-enter service with this airplane, because they're talking about at the earliest the first week of April. They have, I believe it's 34 airplanes. They've said that they're not even sure. They're not even sure. It's not particularly urgent to get these things back into service because of the whole COVID situation. They don't see traffic really recovering at all in the first quarter next year. I mean, they are anxious to get the airplanes back in the air, according to Gary Kelly, the CEO. But it's not something that they have to do right away or all at one time. So they're working on a plan to get them phased in. United Airlines is the other one in the U.S., and they're talking first quarter. I believe they have 24 of the airplanes. They're talking about getting it started in the first quarter.
What about other countries? When does that expect to follow suit with the FAA?
Well, EASA, the European regulator, and Brazil and Transport Canada appear likely to certify or unground the airplane within the coming days, according to the FAA Administrator Dixon. I'm thinking that it's going to be next week sometime. That at least one of those will lift the grounding for in their jurisdictions.
So what does Boeing expect to do now? They have a bunch of airplanes. When do they start delivering the 737 MAXs they have in inventory?
Well, they've said that it's going to take probably about 2 weeks to get each airplane ready for delivery. They have them stored in a lot of them in Victorville, California, in the desert. There are about 450 airplanes that are in storage sites in the U.S., while there were another 387 in service with 59 airlines when the grounding occurred. Essentially, Boeing will have to they'll have to remove environmental protection equipment and deep preservation of the engines and systems. They'll have to, accomplish that. That'll take about 3 days. Days 4 to 10 will involve software updates and flight preparations, engine runs and flight control checks, and flight and aircraft operational checks by Boeing. Then from day 11 to 16, we'll see completion of certification of the airworthiness preparation and issuance once the airplane passes all tests and the FAA accepts the results, and the transfer of the aircraft's title deeds to the customer and preparation of the aircraft for the ferry flights. to the airline's home bases. That 5-day phasing usually includes customer walkthrough and customer acceptance teams doing an on-ground quality review, and then a customer validation flight to check all the systems and the aircraft's behavior and the whole flight envelope.
It sounds like Boeing is going to be working through their backlog or at least their inventory for quite a while. Yeah,
it's not going to happen this next year. They'll probably get about half of them done next year, with the priority placed on the airplanes that are sitting in storage right now. Originally they were saying that they were hoping to get most of them done by the end of the year, but that plan has changed for some reason, and I guess a lot of it has to do with the market right now with the whole COVID situation. They're the airlines aren't as really feeling pressured to take the airplanes right away. Some of them don't need them. The fact that Boeing is liable for the grounding means that the airlines are not violating their contracts by not taking the airplanes within a particular time. So there's going to be a lot more flexibility for the airlines to actually, take the airplanes on their own time schedules.
All right. Thanks, Craig.
Sure. No problem, Chad.
So also, Gulfstream had a media webinar, I guess, on Thursday, Kerry, and you listened in, and they had talked about the market conditions for 2020 and what they expect for 2021. So just tell us where they are.
Well, Chad, Mark Burns, who's the president of Gulfstream, joined Scott Neal, who is the senior vice president of worldwide sales, to discuss an overview of how the company has fared during COVID. And basically, the message is 2020 has been a struggle and they've had to readjust to things just like everyone else, but they're really optimistic right now. Scott Neal mentioned that sales began to they started to trickle along in the second quarter, but by July is when they really started to see some traction. And he said that has just continued on to where they had an actually decent third quarter, and they're seeing that momentum into the fourth quarter. Now, going forward, Mark Burns discussed 2021 a little bit, saying that they're seeing already some enthusiasm with their customers because of the COVID vaccines coming up, and there's a sense that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that the end of this pandemic might be in sight. So he sees that's buoying business a little bit and is optimistic for 2021 as a result.
Yeah, they also gave a update on the G700 program. So what do they have to say about that?
Well, Gulfstream, one of the amazing things that they've done is they've been just moving right along with the G700 certification program. And it was a fairly newly announced aircraft just a year ago. But they flew the G700 for the first time, as we all know, on Valentine's Day this year. And now they have 5 aircraft in the program, the 5th just joining about a month ago. And they've checked off a number of just the basic tests that you need for certification, that all the flutter testing, stalls, the cold weather, the high altitude, all the flying qualities. And now they're doing a deep dive into avionics testing. And that was the update. That the third person on the call was Colin Miller, who is the Senior Vice President of Innovation, Engineering, and Flight Test. So he gave an update. And he said that the program is going tremendously well, that there's almost no squawks on these airplanes as they're flying. And they're doing the deep dive into avionics. And Mark Burns said that they're getting ready to send the first one off to completions.
Well, that's pretty good, especially for COVID times.
Yes. They've had to do a lot of readjustments to COVID. They've done a lot of remote working. And Mark Burns said that they find that they can do that and that they're designing airplanes remotely. And, but they've also have slowly integrated people back in. He said there's been a lot of lessons learned on how to handle the virus and how to protect yourself. And so they said the operations have been going very well. And, it's not just with the design, but these changes have affected everything to how they deal with customers and sales and how they deal with even manufacturing and, maneuvering of the supply chain. So it's been an interesting year where they've, like every other manufacturer, have to take a different approach to be able to continue as normal operations as possible. But Mark Burns was encouraged that production and design and, everything has been steamrolling along. Just, aside from that, they even managed to get EASA certification for the G600 during this time.
Did he talk about any future programs? I know they've been looking at Supersonic for quite a while. Did he address any of that stuff?
Well, that was brought up, but of course they're not going to give many details except to give the standard, everything's on the table and we look far out and we're looking at all different market segments. Specifically with Supersonic, they reiterated that they are doing research and development in that area. I mean, with the G700, one of the tests, they brought the aircraft up to Mach 0.99. So, I mean, that is essentially supersonic. You're just a tiny bit underneath it. So they certainly have the wherewithal, the knowledge. And, Mark Burns was actually quite proud of the knowledge and the know-how, and what their capabilities are. But at the same time, he cautioned that there are many, many obstacles that must be overcome, including being able to operate sustainably. I mean, there's within the supersonic community, there's wide acceptance that you will not be able to bring an aircraft to market unless it is sustainable. So he thinks it's probably about a decade away.
So obviously he's not afraid of Aviation flying and certifying an airplane this decade then.
No, I don't think so. I think and Aviation has kind of an interesting model where they're trying to optimize the airplane for subsonic as well as supersonic. So I think Aviation has an acknowledgement that there has some regulatory and environmental hurdles that they must clear as well.
Actually, that's a great segue into another story you did this week on Hermeus. They're just bypassing supersonic altogether and just going for hypersonic. But they do have some funding they just got, and they are starting tests on engines. So what are they up to?
Hermeus has come out of nowhere just about. They're a group of aerospace executives who have worked with some well-known companies such as SpaceX and NASA and Boeing and GE and Honeywell that have come together with this idea for hypersonic aircraft. And interestingly, they're working in tandem on the engine and on the aircraft itself. And so they, in my opinion, surprised many with winning a U.S. Air Force contract. I think it was in August to do some, prototype technology development of of their idea or vision for a hypersonic business jet. And the way they got it is they had developed an engine prototype for a Mach 5 jet, and they demonstrated it in February. And they said that they went from, 0 to 5,000 in no time. They developed that in 9 months and had it tested in front of Air Force officials, which led to the contract award in August. Well, now that they've, that testing was actually, I believe, done. I could be wrong, but I believe it was done in Air Force facilities. Now they've stood up their own test stand, and they tweeted out a picture of it or Snapchatted out a picture of it. And they're developing a larger facility that would be a more substantial test facility, and would be capable of light manufacturing. So as they progress towards an actual test engine, and at the same time they're refining whatever their plans are going to be for this jet, and they say that the details are going to be forthcoming in months. And funding it all, they have what I would consider seed money. They just closed on a $16 million Series A funding round of funding, and they had gotten another round of funding, I think in 2019, that they announced that helped really launch this effort. They did not detail that I know of how much that was for, but it's enough between that and I would imagine the aerospace or the U.S. Air Force contract to really move along on this project. And they are doing it very quickly.
Yeah, and the Air Force contract was for a presidential aircraft, right? It's only just a development stage, right?
Right. Yes, the vision is to help spur, develop, or actually build and deliver. I'm sure that's Hermeus' ultimate goal, a hypersonic jet that could be used as an Air Force One to transport the president. And yes, it did come from the presidential and executive airlift directorate. They were part of that fund contract award.
So what's their timeline? Obviously, they're not going to be flying this thing next year.
They haven't been specific about that, but I did read something that they expected it to be in about a decade.
Which is pretty aggressive for a hypersonic aircraft, right?
It's aggressive considering, Gulfstream, a tried and true company that is, moving along quite nicely on its own G700 that can almost reach Mach 1, thinks that supersonic, let alone hypersonic, is a decade away.
Well, it'll be interesting to see where all this goes.
Yes, it will be. And, listen, these are veteran aerospace executives. They obviously have ties into the U.S. Air Force. They obviously know how to pull together a prototype fairly quickly. They know how to stand up test stands. So they know what they're doing and they know how to do it efficiently. It's just, will they get enough funding in the future and continue the momentum? Because it's a very expensive venture they're going down.
Right. But I think if they can continue to show progress, then the funding probably will come, especially if they can develop a engine for a Mach 5 airplane in less than a year. I mean, it hasn't been done before.
Oh, no, it's actually quite amazing. So, if anything, it'll be great fun to watch the progress of this program and see, where it goes.
All right. Thanks for that, Kerry. Thanks for listening to AINdebrief. Another podcast episode will air next Friday. In the meantime, go to www.ainonline.com for the latest aviation news from AIN.